Well, we want to welcome you all to this week's program with the IWP writers talking about dystopian and utopian narratives. This week we have with us, I'm Kendall Heitzman. The IWP, I teach Japanese literature and culture here at the University of Iowa. The IWP, I don't know if they were thinking utopia or dystopia when they thought of replacing Christopher Merrill with me for the week, but I'm going to believe it's utopia. With us today we have Lava Omer Darwesh from Iraq, who graduated from the American University of Iraq with degrees in business and English literature. In her native city of Sulaimani, she started a Freedom Writers Club and a Book Lovers Club. Her poems have appeared in the anthology Lanterns of Hope, and she translates poetry and prose from English into Kurdish. Gimba KAKANDA from Nigeria is with us. Gimba published a first volume of poetry, Safari Pants, in 2010. I love that title. His other works have been anthologized. He is an editor at the Daily Nigerian, a daily committed to promoting transparency in governance, and he maintains a weekly column in other periodicals concerned with social issues. Yaara SHEHORI from Israel is with us, is a literary editor at Keter Publishing House with a PhD in Hebrew literature. She has published many works of fiction, poetry, and nonfiction, most recently the novel Aquarium in 2016. In 2015, she received both the Levi Eshkol Prime Minister's Prize and the Minister of Culture Award for Hebrew Literature in the Young Authors category. In 2017, Aquarium was awarded the Bernstein Prize as Best Novel in Hebrew. And finally, closest to me is FUJINO Kaori from Japan. She writes short stories and novellas about the horror that lurks behind everyday life. In 2006, she won the Bungakukai Prize for New Writers for her story Iyashi Itori, The Greedy Bird. She was nominated for the Akutagawa Prize once in 2009, before winning it in 2013 for her acclaimed novella Tsumeto Me, Nails and Eyes. Her book, Ohanashi Shite Ko-chan, Little Miss Tell Me a Story, was published by Kodansha that same year. Her most recent collection of stories is Final Girl from 2016, and that statement will no longer be true in November when her most recent collection of stories, Dress, will be published in Japan. I wanted to just say a few words about today's topic to, I believe, set the stage for these four writers. Dystopia, more than utopia maybe, is overused in American culture, and it could mean anything. And it seems today that it means something very specific. The dystopian narrative, as we often understand it, is a function of the present as we understand the present. If counter-histories and what-if stories show us a world that is splintered at some point in the past, and science fiction details a world yet to come, dystopian worlds are only understandable through the lens of our current preoccupation with a world going off the rails. They are always set after some sort of fall, and the time from which they have fallen is often the present day in which we live. Often they are concerned with the state's attempt to repress memory by creating a canon and destroying the archive that would allow for variant interpretations or individual memories. We think of the pneumatic tubes that whisk away so-called corrected history in 1984, or the modified Beatitudes, blessed are the silent, Jesus never said that, in The Handmaid's Tale. Narratives such as Orwell's 1984, Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale offer us protagonists who are on the cusp with fading memories of life before the fall, with a receding memory of the way things used to be, and few tools at their disposal to retrieve it. Winston confronts the linguistic hyper-rationalization of newspeak in 1984, and Offred the attempt to keep women illiterate in The Handmaid's Tale. Against this assault on language itself, it's often interesting how Shakespeare's wielded as an antidote. The savage and brave new world turns to the bard to learn how to become more human. The troupe of performers in Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11 wander the Great Lakes region of the United States, bringing Shakespeare to isolated towns of survivors of a great plague. These are all English language examples, however, and we would do well to remember that our dystopia is not everyone's dystopia, and my dystopia is not your dystopia. I'd like to tell people that lately I've been reading a dystopian text called The New York Times. A new episode appears on the cover every day, and the only thing that keeps it from becoming truly frightening is its utter preposterousness. But what we call a dystopian nightmare of incredible proportions, many around the world would call another Friday in America. In our efforts to get back to the so-called utopian days of the Obama administration, we must not forget either the dystopias that we have created elsewhere or the dystopia that this country represents, even in supposed happier times for those who live on the margins. The IWP writers who will speak today are our consciences and our teachers, and we are honored to have them with us today. We'll start with Lava Omer Darwesh.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My topic is about Utopia, which is not either a dystopia or a utopia. So if this world is a dystopia, given all the problems that surround us, why do we need to make it worse? Dystopias resemble the folk stories my grandma told me when I was little, terrifying, but also real enough to be true. They put me to sleep somehow, and I changed the stories in my dreams. Utopia, it may seem familiar to this process, falling asleep and dreaming of change. We conjure worst-case scenarios readily, but struggle to imagine the best-case narratives. Dystopia is easy to imagine because it seems to surround us. Government control, propaganda, censorship. It seems real because these problems exist in society. Utopia, on the other hand, seem too good to be true because the ideals underpinning such fantasies don't exist anymore. 2 years ago, I took a modern world humanity class that covered ideologies like communism, nationalism, imperialism, enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution. Along with the texts arguing how they would lead to a better society, a utopia for contrast, we read 1984, Brave New World, and Mein Kampf. As our final class assignment, we were required to write a short story. It could follow the either model. At first, I wanted to write a utopia story, but this was harder than it seemed. The world's chaos blocked my imagination. I chose dystopia instead, feeling there were things I could warn people about. The threat of technology, how politics serve a limited group of people. Now, when I return to my story, it leaves me hopeless and full of despair, because I changed my ordinary day-to-day fears into their ultimate nightmares. Nowadays, dystopia surrounds us everywhere, in books, movies, television series. It has become a dominant theme. Like in my story, this culture leaves us feeling hopeless. I remember reading 1984. It took me a year to finish it, because I found its themes so terrifying. Totalitarianism, government oppression, ideological brainwashing, the way they force ideals upon society. This resonated with me because I recognized I was surrounded by these problems to an extent. The themes represented in the novel existed in reality. Yet dystopias may also be valuable because, by warning us about the future, they offer the possibility to change it. This is why, in my poems, I talk about past experiences but from an angle never before considered, hoping that through my writing, mistakes won't be repeated again in the future. Different from Utopia, however, is my focus on writing not from some abstract ideal, but for the generation to come, to make sure I did something to improve the world and make a difference in the lives of my beloved ones. When I write about past experiences, my intent is to transform the past into a better future, similar to how I dreamed of folk tales as a girl. To preserve the warning of a dystopia, while emphasizing Utopia's promise, I developed the concept of Utopia, through which I imagined the future to be a better version of the past. By that, I mean that the story signals that a tragedy has already taken place. The major action of the story has ended, but through the perspective of a character in the future. The resolution is still possible. For example, in my poem Dua, Dua is stoned to death. Other poets and writers showed hatred, revenge, and anger telling their story. But Dua's forgive those who stoned her, who talks about with the stones to show the other side of love. Dystopias are like silence. The longer you sit with it, the sooner you will confront your deepest fears. Utopias, on the other hand, lull you into the feeling that there is nothing wrong. Since it's difficult for us to imagine a utopia, and dystopia already surround us, let's keep the promise of utopia and the warning of dystopia, the opposite of what we have today, when worst-case scenarios paralyze us and few have a faith that anything can be changed.
Gimba KAKANDA.
I will be reading what I title The Independent Writer. I started with an Igbo proverb. Igbo are an ethnic group in Nigeria. Let the hawk perch, let the eagle perch, and if one tells the other not to perch, may his wing break. A feud broke out in the neighborhood, and my family was forced to deal with the aftermath. Initially, we didn't intervene. The quarreling couple frightened us, and secondly, their problem weren't our concern. But my aunt couldn't take it. Their roads got in the way of our sleep. She was the first to put words to the tension rapidly escalating outside our window, first scattered throughout the week, then recurring on a daily basis as senseless chaos. The noises came from the house. The noises came from a house 3 blocks away, a shouting match between husband and wife whose marriage we had always thought was perfect. Almost a year had passed since my aunt left her matrimonial home to come and stay with us. That day, charging out of the house and straight into the conflict zone, we knew that she had gone to share her wisdom, that they needed to take a break. But after some time, she re-entered the house in tears. She refused to speak with anyone, even my mother. Days later, I learned the reason for this. The woman my aunt had set out to save, with a well-meaning advice, rebuked her. The wife cubed that if my aunt had been true to her vows and actually cared about her marriage, she would have never left her husband. That, unlike my aunt, she didn't expect marriage to be easy. That is perfect. I was 14 then. Over the years, I have used this incident as a sieve through which to think about social values, helping me to distinguish realism from idealism, truth from propaganda, and observe the world. Who are we to judge our neighbors? The wife's defense of her marriage made me recognize the need to put a question mark on those immediate impulses that urge us to correct others and demonstrate our superiority, especially when my aunt's utopia, a perfect marriage, was thrown in her face as a fantasy. Utopia and dystopia similarly propose their own suspect fantasies, one through positive example and the second through its negation. This makes me wonder, is it right to expect writers to be philosophers and prophets telling us how to live our lives? Or does this expectation actually limit the writer's artistic freedom and stop them from seeing reality? Art that replicates falsely enlightened ideals, in my view, might unintentionally achieve the opposite, savage exploitation. We saw what happened in Congo Free State when King Leopold II of Belgium butchered roughly 10 million people in the attempt to seize land and steal resources, which, according to Adam Hochschild, in his controversial book, King Leopold Ghost, are now estimated at roughly $1 billion. We also mustn't forget Joseph Conrad, that Polish-British author writing from Imperialism Outpost, who portrayed the Africans as savages and denied them the human complexity of his fellow Europeans. In Heart of Darkness, written in 1899, It describes Leopold's Congolese as fine fellows, cannibals in their place, and perpetuates Europe's degrading view of Africans. Conrad, by normalizing the colonizer's savagery as a salvation from the apparent darkness of Africa, serves as an example of what happens when an author writes according to mass sentiment and ideals rather than critically reflecting on the diverse and complicated reality before him. Today, historians like Adam Hochschild have shown us the twisted ideas underlying Conrad's work. He argues that invading another people's land is not civilized, but rather more savage than the darkness the colonizers claim to fight. Regrettably, we are here today because of Europe's pursuit of a vision of utopia. This is why a writer should remain independent in his writing, non-judgmental, sensitive and critical of popular belief, and not, like Conrad, replicate existing injustices through the pursuit of utopic ideals or truths buried in the misguided psychology of mainstream cultures.
Yaara SHEHORI.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us here. So many brave new words. Utopia on the verge of dystopia. Dystopias, as we know, are an efficient tool for encouraging us to think about the near future, and even more importantly, the present. Put simply, dystopia is a version of the world gone awry, a spoiled reality. At the same time, it sold us a mirror to our fantasies, a world we think is ideal, or once believed to be ideal in the past. We can't have the idea of a dystopia without the idea of utopia underlying it. That is to say, an isolated place with perfect people and perfect rules, a golden age that once longed for, a community in which we belonged before being cast away. And yet, the relationship between utopia and dystopia cannot be reduced to such binaries. The very seeds of dystopia, in fact, are embedded in each utopia and grow and thrive there. Utopia often focused on the future, as we know, but I'd like to turn our attention briefly in the direction of the past, to 1611, England, when William Shakespeare wrote what many consider to be his final play, The Tempest. The Tempest presents the story of Prospero, as we know, former Duke of Milan and his daughter Miranda, stranded on an uncharted isle. Miranda's entire experience of mankind has been limited to her father and the deformed slave Caliban, the island's only native, who Prospero exploits with his power. In one of the play's more memorable scenes, after Prospero conjures a storm to bring his usurpers to their deserted island, lonely Miranda meets other humans for the first time and marvels at their presence. "Oh, brave new world," she famously cried with joy, "that has such people in it." Aldous Huxley borrows this line in his dystopian Brave New World from 1932, but used them ironically and in other senses. Here, they serve to illustrate the breach between an ideal vision of the world and its underlying horrifying reality. The bright, optimistic lines of Miranda are charged with brutal darkness. But perhaps this irony exists in The Tempest too, especially when we think of Caliban, who Prospero refers to as this thing of darkness. This island may appear to be a paradise, but when we look at the context of Caliban's life, an individual banished from his home, became a slave and mocked, it is a dystopia. And his tragedy perhaps argues colonialism, future victims. You can see that Caliban is the anagram of the word cannibal, derived from Carib, and associated with the myth of the flesh-eating savages. And it's also connected to the color black, and we have a lot of studying about the role of Caliban in this play in post-colonialism studying. Indeed, utopia and dystopia are inseparable, not just in Shakespeare. This is a sensitive subject for me. I grew up in an Israeli kibbutz, a collective agricultural community, once equated with utopia. As a girl, I was often withdrawn from the children's house, where we studied, ate, slept, and played, to pose for cameras of international tourists. They were inspired by our advanced community and by us, lovely children, who did everything together. Actually, for some of us, it was a nightmare. Maybe this is why, in my own writing, I'm drawn to writing about dystopias, such as in my novel Aquarium, where a father's junkyard paradise became his daughter's hell, or my novella The Years of Milk, a post-apocalyptic version of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, where the children vanish and the women are left in a rat-infested city, rich in luxury, but lacking basic supplies. In one of the major scenes in the novella, the heroine visits a zoo, where most of the animals have been evacuated. The heroine takes comfort in the normalcy of the donkeys, until they utter grunt like car alarms. The guide explained the zebras were painted into donkeys, as most donkeys are gone. Utopia is a false vision. Zebra dressed as donkeys. Power dressed as kindness or the common good. They are structure of power, masked by the appeal of nostalgia or simplicity. When you misconstrue one thing for another, announcing the absurd pleasure of utopia while ignoring the sufferers of others, then it has repercussion. There are victims. There are always victims. And the victims won't be the utopia's architects, those who discovered empty lands or deserted isles. In my novella, the victims are the children. Maybe we can think of them as Caliban's offspring, this thing of darkness. After all, it's our darkness too, a dystopia that we must claim responsibility for. Thank you.
And our last speaker is Fujino Kaori.
Hi. Hi. Utopia and the future. I have only written a utopian story once. In November, it will be published in Japan with the title My Heart is Yours as part of my next short story collection. As I was writing that story, I was debating whether or not I should have children. I'm still wondering that actually. There are a lot of things to worry about when it comes to that decision, but the most pressing problem is that I don't think of myself as a person overflowing with physical strength or motivation. I become exhausted and discouraged very easily. That being a situation, would I be able to have a child and then continue to raise it to adulthood? And what about my career? I find marriage to be delightful, but pregnancy and birth are like a kind of death to me. If it were to happen, I think that part of the me who's existed until now would cease to be. That got me thinking, what kind of body would I need to have to want to give birth to a child? It was then I thought of the Atlantic football fish, also called a man gobbler. Did any of you know how these anglerfish reproduce? First off, the female is by far much larger than the male. So big, in fact, they almost look like different species. The little tiny males swim about the bottom of the ocean, and when they find a giant female, they bite her in the abdomen. The male becomes adhered to the female's body and absorbed into her, starting with the area around its mouth. Before long, the male has completely lost his own identity and become merely an extra organ on the female. From our perspective, a male in that situation doesn't appear to be anything other than a tumor on the side of the female's body. And so the male ends up being only an organ that releases sperm to the female during the spawning season. If you look up the pictures of these fish on the internet, you will be able to see specimens of females with the ringed bodies of many males attached to them. With this in mind, I wrote My Heart is Yours. In this short story, people appear to lead lives not so different from ours today, but the actual circumstances turn out to be quite different. In the society and the workplace, it is the women who take the lead and wield all of the power and advantages. For example, women prefer their men to be young and adorable with a slim figure. This is because once a woman chooses to become pregnant, the husband must stay attached to her stomach until she gives birth. In this world, sex happens with a woman sprawled on her back and the putty male face down on top of her. His body starts to break down in the area of contact to become one with the woman. This is when fertilization occurs. Immediately following conception is when the belly is at its largest. As the pregnancy progresses, the husband continues to be absorbed as nutrients until the time of the birth, when he will be completely gone. For males, sex is a once-in-a-lifetime activity that results in death. As such, the women don't rely on any support from the men after the birth. After all, the male partner has already been completely dissolved and digested. Raising the child does not require a partner. Society has created a welfare system for this purpose. Birth wouldn't take away from a woman's stamina either. With their bodies as robust and strong as before, the women are able to support each other and energetically continue with their professions. However, my husband shuddered as he read this short story. To me, it doesn't sound like a bad world to live in, but apparently to him it was a frightening dystopia. But if I really think about it, even I wouldn't say it's a perfect utopia. In the story, the men are on receiving end of much of the same sexual discrimination that women face every day in reality. I want to eradicate the sexism, not to make men deal with it. And I definitely don't think that men should die and cease to exist after fulfilling their reproductive role. And so I may have made a terrible mistake at the beginning when I said I wrote a utopia. It seems this is in fact a dystopian story. Is it possible to really create a utopian novel? I think it's one of the most difficult things to do. When people evaluate novels, one of the criteria they often use is to look for how closely it depicts reality. Deep down, I think that by itself is pretty meaningless. Really, what I want to try to write are things that no one thought of yet, and the stories that even I, as the author, don't fully understand. However, there are limits to what we can do as humans. We can only write about our own experiences and whatever imagined world we can build on top of that. We can only really deal with current reality. So now, I would like to talk about one of the books I love the most, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. It's one of the most famous dystopian novels. A coup d'etat has taken place and America's government has been overturned. However, it's not called the United States anymore, but the Republic of Gilead. Before the coup happened, there was some event that caused birth rates to decrease dramatically. And so the Republic of Gilead created a strict system to classify and control the women to ensure that the women who could still reproduce were given to the men with the most power and influence. The women who were still fertile were called handmaids. The handmaids received tutelage in accepting their new roles in society and in how to be obedient. In order to prevent united action and rebellion, the handmaids are no longer allowed to read or write, and to erase individually, they all must wear the same clothes. The most truly horrifying scene in the full terrifying novel comes near the end. A high-ranking man known as the commander gives a speech to our main character, a handmaid named Fred. And I skip following quotation, sorry. And it was so shocked. I was so shocked. In this dystopian story, the world he presents as dystopian was the world in which I living and reading this very book. While the commander's thinking was wrong, the problem was not in his depiction of our reality. In fact, his description was spot on. This is an awful world. I dwelled on this thought. If that's the case, this world really is a dystopia. I am now living in a dystopia. So long as we only try to depict things exactly as they are, even using our abilities to their utmost, we will never be able to escape the dystopia. Utopia is too much for us to handle. While we are busy chasing utopia, it will surely flip like a mirror image into dystopia. If a utopian novel is to come into existence, it will be something that no one has ever thought of before and something that even the author herself doesn't understand. The question is, will we acknowledge the value of that work, and will we have the ability to truly appreciate it? Thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Matt for translate this. Thank you.
That may have gotten drowned out by applause, but this was translated with great heroism this week by Mac Gill, who's sitting right up here. So while we're waiting for your questions to make their way up here, I'll tell you about some upcoming events. It's a busy year at the IWP. This Friday, we'll have the usual Shamba House reading series event. Yaara SHEHORI is actually on that list with a couple of other writers. And an IWP and special guest from Pakistan, IWP 1988, Waqas Khwaja will be there, Subraj Singh, thank you. On Friday, September 22nd, Born Leaders United presents the Unique 2 Alley Fashion Show at Film Scene at 6 p.m. This event will include fashionable cultural streetwear styles from multiple cultures that make up the Iowa City community. On September 24th, Prairie Lights. I know?
There's no cinema there. Prairie Lights reading? Okay.
I think you're done.
Okay, yeah, just the, okay.
Not there yet. Yeah, it's there. Sunday, September 24th, the Prairie Lights reading series at Prairie Lights Bookstore from 4 to 5 p.m., featuring Enza Garcia Ariaza from Venezuela and Kennedy from New Zealand, and the translation workshops, John Vader over here collecting cards. Sunday, September 24th, later that evening at 7 p.m., Cinematheque in the Adler Journalism Building, E105. An evening of short experimental poetry, personal films from Algeria, Germany, Hungary, Israel, Macedonia, and New Zealand. Starting on Tuesday of next week, the 2017 Ida Beam visiting scholar, poet, and translator Rosanna Warren will be presenting at a number of venues. The Ida Beam Distinguished Visiting Professor Lecture, Max Jacob, a French poet between the arts, will take place on Tuesday, September 26th at 5 p.m. at the Visual Arts Building, E125. Warren will also read at Prairie Lights on Wednesday, September 27th at 7 p.m. And finally, on Thursday, September 28th, 3 IWP writers, Panache Chigumadzi, Dilmandila, and Gimba KAKANDA, will read with Center for Afrofuturist Studies current artist in residence, Catherine Simone Reynolds, at RAD Incorporated at 8 p.m. Going to start with this one. Is Facebook and Wikipedia, our Facebook and Wikipedia, paving the way to utopia?
Anyone?
It's for anybody's.
Okay. I can start. Well, I think the answer is no. And let me elaborate. I think in the Arab Spring, everybody was really, I'm trying to find the right word, but we were like so happy that we have Twitter and people can go to the street using Twitter, but we saw that it wasn't enough. I think it's an illusion that the world becomes smaller and now we all can see the same pictures of cats, which is nice. We all have kittens. But no, I think it's just leave us at home and we can like things and dislike and have angry faces. I don't think that really change anything to a utopian world. Someone else?
I think it represents a dystopia rather than a utopia, because nowadays on Facebook you would see things on their extreme level. You see hatred, hatred speech over the social media, and you're just gonna stay at home and actually like or dislike or comment on the thing that has been posted rather than doing anything about it.
May I add something?
Yes.
Yes, I have written about this in my fifth novel, The Last Crowd. It's about how social media and internet era become the dystopia for people in the world. Because internet, social media, it's become like an escape for people from their reality. And then people, humankind, can be so like artificial people, can be a fake human being, and it's a very hard and very difficult situation in the future when everything is not getting real anymore and people choose to live, choose to being trapped in the social media and internet. Thank you.
Okay. I think I will just quickly add that I think it's neither utopia or dystopia. It is just the peak of the civilization we are in now, and it is the strength of the technology in existence now. So like Facebook is something, or social media generally is something that has come to stay, and it's something we must deal with. I think it's just kind of like calibrates the level of civilization we are in now, and it's something we should deal with. There must be definitely clash of idea. It has its negative, it's positive. Like before the advent of the social media, there were people that don't even know we have skyscrapers in Africa. So it's I think it has created a kind of it has its negative. Like people can easily promote their own bigotries and all that, but there are the positive side. You know, you get to see the world you've never ever seen. You get to see the people you've never ever seen. People for whom you have a prejudiced sentiments, people for whom you have a very narrow understanding of. You know, it kind of like show you so many things. Like for me personally, you know, despite even having read widely, I have learned a lot of things on social media, and it's I think it's integrating. It's the positive side outweigh the negative, like from my own understanding and from my own experience.
There is another question.
すいません、日本語で日本語で言います。Facebook は私は本名でしか登録できないというのが少しちょっと残念だなと思うんですけど、私は本名で登録してないんですけど、でもし本名で登録しなくてもよかったら真実を投稿しなくてもいいですよね。私の理想の自分を作って理想のユートピアを Facebook 上で作り上げられるかもしれないのに多分それを制限するために本名で登録するっていう決まりがあるんだと思うんですけど、でももしそういう理想の自分っていうのをみんな演出したくて Facebook とかやるんだと思うんですけど、もし完璧に全く自分じゃない別人の理想のユートピアを Facebook 上で作り上げられたら、私はそれはそれでとても楽しいことだと思うんですけど、もしそれが現実に人に知られてしまったらそういうことをしてるっていうことが逆に現実がディストピアになってしまう。
So no, Facebook noルールについて話してください。本名を使わない。So, it took a wild turn at the end there, but on Facebook you're supposed to use your real name, and that limits the appeal of it to Fujino-san. If you could use a fake name and create this sort of idealistic you, it would be a lot more fun. And I think if I understand her correctly, of course, if that were the case and Facebook becomes the utopia, then real life would become more of a dystopia because of that. And so maybe that wouldn't be the dream that she thinks it might be. So I have one other question here. Well, this is a comment, I guess. Iowa City is the brave new world. Followed by a question. Was Conrad really writing about the irony of colonialism?
Yeah, it was an underlying message that wasn't exactly revealed in the criticism of his book because he portrayed like two groups of people. He created like a binary, as we say, the civilized and savages. But then he related with the atrocities being committed. But in spite of that, he gave an impression that, he didn't criticize colonialism in a sense. He only criticized the excesses. And then he portrayed two kinds of humans. And the barbarians, unfortunately, were the people whose land were even invaded. And, that kind of, and that created a very damaging impression for a very long time about the perception of Congolese, or generally referred to as the African. Because even the only time the only instances the natives spoke in the book, one was to show enthusiasm for cannibalism, and then the second time was to make a very dumb report that Mr. Code, he dead, and that kind of incomprehensible speech is something that has been popularized by Hollywood, because in Hollywood you only see some bad-speaking Africans, and sometimes we can't even relate with the Africans being portrayed in Hollywood. Like recently there was the movie Concoction, starring Will Smith. Like on Nigerian Twitter, we kind of we made fun of that movie because nobody in Nigeria speaks like the character, and he was meant to be a Nigerian, and we have fantastic Nigerian actor who could have played a better role. So like the point I was trying to make in this story is like, one, Utopia was colonialism. He didn't criticize colonialism. He just criticized Mr. Code and his and other colonialist excesses, their own atrocity. But then what is the bitter truth that was expected of a writer of his own standing then was to call out that, okay, these imperial activities in Africa was inhuman, was barbaric. You don't come to somebody's land and then had 10 million people butchered, and then see yourself as the civilized, and then the world was turned around. So even after I think even after criticizing the colonialists and all that, there was an instance he was trying to describe one of the native, and I even had the quote here, and in the page 116, he said, "He was the most unstable kind of fool I had ever seen." And so like that even show you the level of a perception of the native. So if you say the colonialists had done several atrocities, how could a native be the most unstable kind of fool you had ever seen? And then another instance, the only female character in the book was described simply as savage and superb, that I kind of show a generalized version of the African caricature. And I think I took note of another thing from the book. Describing the native, he described them as in having faces like grotesque masks. And yeah, like that was a kind of like generalizing. So, and the saddest thing is the narrator didn't show sympathy. He had the will to sympathize with these natives, but he didn't do anything to even show some sympathy to his crew members. That is Mr. Malo. The only instant when one of his character, I think that was his helmsman, died. Instead of he revealed that it's like people may find it strange that he was sympathizing with a dead African, with one of the dead natives. So like to him, and I quote, sorry, I'm taking too much time. Okay, sorry, let me okay, you say, I miss my helmsman, that it was strange that, that he was showing sympathy for a savage who was no more, who has no more account than a grain of sand in a black Sahara. So that is how he showed
I'd like to clarify my question. The first part is that Iowa City is the Brave New World. It is, because we have NCS and we have ACT. We measure the inside of people's heads. You cannot go to get a master's degree or a PhD degree or go to any college unless you come through Iowa City, because this is a testing center for the world. And as for Conrad, I saw irony. He said all of these people went into making curse, because he was talking about the irony of colonialism. And that centered back on how Belgium really was. So Conrad, when he molded his story, he was talking about Europe. And then Conrad was a foreigner. He couldn't even speak English. He was on that ship. And then he was saying, this is how it is, and that's how it is. And he points to these things, and he puts these words in their characters, ignorance in the words of these characters, so that it's not Conrad telling the story. He's observing and putting these observations in these people's mouths. So he talks about how someone would see anybody. But to me, that's the first anti-colonialist novel. Whatever they call it, short story, long story, stretching story. But that's all I wanted to say.
Can I quickly respond to that?
A quick response, maybe?
Yeah. Sorry. I think what he portrayed in the book was to show Africa as the opposite of the Europe. And the relationship he portrayed in that book was that between the dog and a dog owner. So no African was given human complexity. They were portrayed because, one, you are shown as being cruel to a dog, and that fact doesn't mean that even if the dog is set from you, the dog has the status of being a human. The dog remains a dog, and then you are the human, however cruel you are to the dog. So that is exactly the relationship between the European colonizer and then the colonized, portrayed in Conrad's book. Because all the Africans were caricature and then portrayed as lacking any human complexity, and that is why like a character was shown as like people may find it strange that he was sympathizing with his helmsman, even if the helmsman has not any word. So yeah, it didn't create, it was not anti-colonialism. It normalizes colonialism. It only attacks the excesses of certain colonizers. Thank you.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left here, and so I think that this question gets at some of the other questions in a succinct way. How does one write a dystopian narrative and not leave the reader feeling hopeless? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? How do you write one without feeling hopeless?
I think I want to start. Okay, I'll start again. I'm not sure that this is our job. If there is any, if we have I'm like hearing myself with everyone else. Sorry. Thank you. I'm not sure that our job is like to portray hope. We can do that, but it's not. We don't have to have an happy ending all the time. And even though I like happy ending, I know how artificial they are. I'm not sure if the role of the dystopia is to awake us for doing something in the world. This is not what I think literature should do, because go and protest. We should rethink things with it. I find the hope in the literature itself, not in the call for action.
また日本語で言いますけど、私もそれはその小説の、人をハッピーエンディングばかりを追求するのは小説の役割ではないと思います。なぜかこう絶望的な気持ちになる小説を読むことにも快楽というものを伴うので、その快楽を私はとても好きだし、これからも追求していきたいなと思います。でまた現実にこういう問題があるっていうことをはっきり文字にして書き起こしたものがここにあるということ自体が何らかのこう希望になるのではないかなと思います。その内容が悪くても絶望的でも。
And so a bit of agreement that it's not really the writer's job to provide somebody with a happy ending all of the time. And isn't there a pleasure to be had in reading stories that don't have happy endings? And if the writer is pointing to problems in the world today and dealing with those, isn't that enough?
Okay. I think some of the dystopias should have at least sort of a happy ending. Not an exactly happy ending, but at least showing some hope that there would be change in the future. There is still some hope. Because the world that we are living in nowadays is a dystopia. People are sort of hopeless. And when you read a utopia, such as yours Utopia, Thomas More, you would sort of think or sometimes laugh, wow, this world is imaginary. It is impossible to live in. And I think it's because of the problems that is surrounding us, the things that we are going through every day, and through their worst case scenarios. If we have a dystopia with all these atmospheres and their worst case scenarios, then people become more hopeless and don't believe in a better future as well.
I think saying it will leave readers hopeless means that you are undermining people's capacity to reason, people's capacity to reflect on their own reality. People are not robots. They are not they are not atoms. They are capable of creating a solution for their own problem. So I think no writer should try to make or try to impose an ideal system or thinking or solution. And that is why I don't read moralizing books, because I find it a kind of insulting. Because somebody telling me how to live my life, because it's kind of show that I have no intelligence to think what is good or bad for myself. So saying that it will leave the reader hopeless, I think you are kind of indirectly insulting the world collectively, because you are trying to say that they are not capable of reasoning to create an opposite of what you have portrayed in your own book. So I think like it really doesn't even shouldn't even come into deliberation that it will leave the readers hopeless, because we have about 7 billion people in the world. So saying that one story will make people hopeless, it's kind of like insulting. I think that is all I have to say to this.
And I think with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming today. One more round.